My name's Samir. I work for Blue State Digital. Blue State Digital is a digital communications agency. We work with nonprofits, charities, political campaigns, as well as brands, corporate organizations, and ultimately we look to create movements. We look to mobilize communities. I'll talk a bit more about what we do in a bit. I have recently been in India for a few weeks, so there's certainly going to be an India theme to this presentation. Some tenuous links to ugliness, but hopefully I can make them, and it will all make sense by the end. This is my submission for ugliness. While I actually don't find it that ugly, it's just bizarre. I mean, what is this kind of demon thing with a white beard and of course all the arms? So a lot of what I want to talk about today is the cultural representations of ugliness and how it completely depends upon the context in terms of what we find ugly. So I think all of us would probably agree that if beauty is subjective, then ugliness is as well. So one of the things I saw in India, I was in a city called Ahmedabad, which is about a city of 6 million people that maybe many of you haven't even heard of. But right in the middle of this chaotic, bustling, giant Indian city is this oasis. And it's this building that is made of concrete and designed by Le Corbusier. And to me and my wife, who's an architect, and we were visiting it, it's incredible. And it's this Mill Owners Association building. It was built in 1954. And we're walking around this Corbusier building thinking, wow, we're in one of his buildings. It's incredible. It's amazing. No one else is there. The only people that visit this building are tourists and people that are interested in architecture. Everyone else in Ahmedabad really could care less about this building and actually finds it to be an eyesore. Who knows if this building is even going to last or be torn down? The cost of the land it's on, because it's right on a river in the city, is so expensive and rising so much that developers just want it for the real estate. They want to tear it down. They want to build a high-rise. So, it's really hard to say, is this ugly? Is this not ugly? Should this be saved? Should it not be saved? What value does this have to the city that it's in? What value does it have historically? Because people in Ahmedabad and people in India really find this beautiful. And the reason they find this beautiful is it's about status. And it's about what it represents. So people would love to live in a building like this. People would love to have a more westernized lifestyle. People would love to move up because in a country that is still developing, that's everything. And that has a big part of what determines what is beautiful and what isn't. If you go to Mumbai, and if you take a tour of Mumbai, they'll take you to see all of the famous sites, and you'll go see the Taj Hotel and the India Gate and Victoria Station. And almost every tour now will also show you this, the world's most expensive residence. And is this ugly? Is it not? I mean, the reaction to this building is definitely mixed in India. Some people find it repulsive for what it represents, which is one of the world's most richest men building on the most expensive real estate in the world, his own private residence, which is basically a skyscraper. It has parking garages. It has an observatory. It's made, there's entire floors that are filled with marble. But, there's also many people who find it to be completely beautiful and find it to be an indicator of success and see it as a source of pride. And also just architecturally, people find it beautiful, whereas some of our ideas about it might be quite different. So what I'm getting at here is that, ugly is obviously subjective, but it really depends upon your class, your culture, your ethnicity, your gender, and it's a matter of taste. And, who's to say what is taste? this movie may or may not be to your taste. I mean, kind of like the painting I showed in the beginning, like, what is this? Like this, you know, this can be really bizarre to some people. But this is a giant, giant, huge blockbuster in India. Now, actually, the dances they're doing and so forth have a lot of context and meaning in terms of this is, you know, traditional tribal folk style of dance. There's representations in every movement they're doing, but none of us know that. So you have to understand your audience, obviously. And I think as a creative community, that's very important in terms of what we find ugly or not. And in terms of, and so the audience for this obviously eats this up. If you're not the audience for this, you may have no idea what it is you're watching. At Blue State, you know, the audience is kind of everything. So we don't deal with purely art, right? Because we work for our clients. There's a commercial aspect to what we do. So we apply art, but we also factor in science. And it's not just about knowing an audience. It's about thinking really deeply about what we want that audience to do. That's kind of the most important thing in terms of Blue State and the work we do. So I'd like to think that the work we do is not described as ugly, but if we were to think about if our work is ugly or not, it actually would have nothing to do with aesthetics. It would have to do with how it achieves what we need to achieve, how it impacts the audience. Because we don't build products, we build movements. And so we can use aesthetics in service of how we build a movement. This is something we've done for Google about, you know, a free and open web in the US, which is very much building a movement around the idea of net neutrality. So is this ugly? This is a plain text email. There's no images. There's nothing, you know, beautiful about how it looks necessarily from a purely visual aesthetic standpoint. But some people would say that the timing of it and the messaging in it are quite beautiful. This plain text email helped elect a president. It was sent out right after, this was for the Obama campaign, it was sent out after Sarah Palin was talking to the Republican convention. She was kind of questioning Obama's community organizing roots. So within hours, this email went out from David Plouffe, who's a campaign advisor, directly to people who were interested in the campaign and spoke about what they had just heard Sarah Palin saying. This email raised more money than any other communication or any other email in the campaign. Plain text, black and white, and it helped elect a president. So from our standpoint, the timing of this, the message in it and everything is quite elegant. Aesthetically, I'll let you judge. Another thing that Blue State has worked on is called Quick Donate. So this is a text message, obviously, and this is kind of like, you know, Amazon one-click, but for donations. So this is something where once you donate, your information stores, you can donate again, and now that means a campaign can get incredibly timely with how they reach out to people for money. So you can imagine during the Obama campaign, if the Republican candidate Mitt Romney is saying something kind of outrageous, which is probably most of what he says, then that would anger some of the Democratic base. You could instantly text people about that and say, you know, reply back with a number, and that's how much we'll charge the account that we have saved for you. And it's that easy. You just text a number, and now you've given money to a cause you believe in. The campaign had people giving like $1,000 via a text message. Nothing like that had ever been done before. This helped Obama raise $690 million online. And this even is sort of a graphical version. There's just text messages, which are 3 lines of text. And if you're more interested in some of this type of work, definitely talk to some of the Blue State people in the room afterwards. So for Blue State, again, Beautiful is a motivated and a mobilized community that's taking action for something they believe in and we believe in. So we are a progressive company. We don't work for certain causes. We do work for other causes. We wear our beliefs on our sleeve, and we don't really apologize for that. This is a website for the Natural History Museum. Natural History Museum here in London, we've worked with them for a long time, and we've just redesigned their website. Now, the important thing to know about this site is that the main things that went into this design were that it's incredibly easy for the museum themselves to maintain and update and create new graphics for. That was almost one of the most important considerations. The second thing is that it's one of the most accessible sites online in terms of the colors used, thinking about disabilities and so forth through the site. And also it's directly tied to what their audience wants. So we spent a lot of time talking to museum audiences, and we kind of heard a lot of needs around, we sort of rolled up a lot of needs into 3 themes, and basically make it easy. So I just want to visit the museum. Let me know when the opening times are, and let me buy tickets. Just keep it simple. The second thing was pique my interest. So, you know, they are interested in knowing more about what happens behind the scenes. When you tell people that, that the museum has 300 on-site scientists doing some of the world's leading research, they're fascinated by that. They want to learn more. And also involve me. So they were interested in being more involved, but they didn't know what that meant or why. Why would you become a member to the Natural History Museum? There's never been a value proposition around that in the past. So those 3 needs actually directly tied into how we structured the site. So, you know, you see over here, visit is very much make it easy. Discover is very much pique my interest. And take part is involve me. But we don't look purely at what the audience wants. We, of course, have to consider the museum's objectives, which are very much around donating and generating revenue through their shop, as the museum is actually a charity, so it's quite important for them. And then they had some very specific audiences, which are different than their public audience that they have to account for, which are proper, professional, hardcore scientists and schools and education. I mean, of course, there's a lot more that went into the site, but it's just an example of how knowing that audience is exactly what goes into building the site, combined with what the museum wants to achieve. So those are the considerations that drive our aesthetics. If you were to see early concepts we did before we had all the research and so forth, aesthetically, at least to me, they were quite beautiful, quite elegant. And some of our designers are in the room that created a lot of that. But that wasn't the most important thing for us. The most important thing was, again, how it works for that audience, for the museum. So I hope that when you hear these examples, when you hear the intention behind what's going into these, it gives you additional context for how you judge it. And I think that that's a very important consideration when it comes to judging things as ugly. It's to really interrogate things and to really question why we feel that way and why we label things that way. Back to Corbusier, another modernist architecture in the vein of his work is the Barbican. So the Barbican, as probably most of you know, has very mixed reactions, less so now, much more in the past, when it was considered to be the ugliest building kind of anywhere. And lots of people still think that it's the epitome of ugliness. It's a giant concrete brutalist building. And actually, I question if it's brutalist, but that's a different conversation. I recently took a tour of the Barbican. I'm quite fascinated with this building. And I definitely recommend going on one of the architecture tours there. It's super interesting. When you learn of the architect's intentions and reasons for some of the aspects of the building, at least for me, it completely changed my context, and I already love this building. If you look at the walls of the Barbican, right, you see it looks like this kind of gravelly concrete, and it's all over it, right? So this is bush hammered. This is basically craftsmen chiseling and hammering into what was poured concrete. So the Barbican otherwise would have looked like the Hayward Gallery, the South Bank, just basically smooth, you know, shuttered concrete. The entire building, right, has this detail on it, all the way up and down these towers on, you know, most surfaces of the building. Now, that certainly was not, you know, that was only going to add cost and time to the building. That required massive amounts of manpower. You know, these are people actually going up and hammering into the concrete. the theory is one of the reasons for that. There's more about this on the architecture tours, that a lot of the Barbican references the rubble and the demolition that was there before the Barbican was built, because it was basically a bomb site. But it also represents craft, and I think for these architects, craft was very important. And to just say the Barbican is kind of a concrete monstrosity or an eyesore is one thing, but then to think about what went into it and the artistry behind it changes your context. It changes what you might think of this. So I think just labeling these buildings as ugly is kind of lazy, to be honest. It's certainly a valid opinion, and anyone can think that, but I would hope that as a creative community, we don't resort to simple labeling. Because when we do, this is what we get. So if you research ugly online, you get pages and pages and pages of this. Certainly, a lot of it's pretty funny, a lot of it's pretty lighthearted. But as you probably know, the more you dig online, the kind of uglier it gets. So the level of commentary and kind of snarky commentary and insulting commentary is staggering, but valid, because of course it's people's opinions. But everyone has an opinion, and not much thought goes into a lot of those opinions. And there's an interesting thing about ugliness, which is, so this is just a simple Google search on ugly, it's all faces. All of it. There's a few animals that you can scroll down pages and pages and pages, and it's all faces. So we clearly use ugly to represent people, and it's an easy label that we use now. And you'll notice, let me go back one, you'll notice that up at the top, Google automatically categorizes things into subjects based on search terms. So what's the very first term on the left? Girl. And you'll find this online a lot. And the simple, easy labeling of people, and especially women, as ugly is just commonplace. So again, it's lazy. You can kind of just see search terms. If you type in ugliest, what comes up? And so I think, we reduce people to their looks when actually what's ugly is around people, I think, is behavior. And looks have nothing to do with it. In terms of some of the submissions we've received, this is one of them. This was someone, in terms of what they wrote us, thinking about things like child abuse, abortion, and rape. This was their way of raising awareness around the issue, making the baby's face look as if it was physically abused and show the blood and bruises. So, this artist's aim was to evoke fear and disgust within the viewer. It was their intent that you might find this ugly, but as well as sympathy. So some people believe it's crucial to judge art based on aesthetics. I know I've had conversations with friends of mine where the meaning behind something should be irrelevant. They want to judge it based on as it is, because that's one way of looking at art. Again, I just think that's a simple and somewhat lazy labeling. I think when we question and when we investigate, we are searching for meaning, right? This is another submission that we got. I don't know anything about it, but I just love the fact that someone sat down and created this and took some time and probably has a reason for it. And I don't know what it is, but I can think about it. But the fact that they actually took the effort to make it makes me think that there's almost nothing ugly in that act of creation. This is a poem, and I think we might have Samir in the room, but from what I understand, this poem is a way of dealing with certain things that are going on in the world. So now we have an engagement, right? We have an engagement in what's going on in the world through creating something. And this was a submission on the topic of ugliness. But actually, it's fantastic that someone's choosing to engage with it in this manner. So here's just some of the other submissions that we've received, which I think you saw on the slideshow earlier. And this is a self-portrait. I mean, it's fascinating to me. Like, I want to see this person the way he sees himself. This is amazing. And I think some of the, even just the shading around the outside, and he referenced kind of a nun's habit. I mean, it's really fascinating. I'd love to learn more. Someone trying to create an ugly painting, a self-portrait, and some more works. And actually my favorite work is this one. This piece, I'm reading a bit of what they wrote, is about how in our society women are told to cover up any imperfections that may be considered ugly. So the artist has represented this with apples. And first they covered any lumps and bumps on the apples with paper mache, then repainted them to look like the perfect apple, covering any brown spots, and then finally covering them in glue to preserve their youth. So in this photo, the apples are about 4 or 5 weeks old, so are probably pretty well off underneath, but the paint and everything on top still seems perfect. And the artist says, personally, I consider the whole need for women to falsely perfect themselves ugly, so this is what the work is all about. Now, just looking at the work, you wouldn't know that. And when we were receiving submissions and I was just glancing through them, my eyes just moved right past this. When I read about it, it became really powerful to me. So again, some people think that you should just be able to judge this and claim whether it's ugly or not. I say, why not question what it is and why it is, and then learn about it from that. I want to talk about a bit of a story now in terms of something else, back to India, in terms of something else in India. So we went to Chandigarh, which is a planned city in the north of India that also Corbusier designed, kind of master planned it. It exists, it's amazing, I highly recommend it. It's kind of this modernist city filled with buildings that not many people know about. And we had kind of we had some guides and people that know about architecture showing us around and telling us about the place. Now, one of the things, if you go to Chandigarh, that almost any guide or tour or anything will tell you about is this rock garden. It's like, you got to see the rock garden. I'm like, all right, we'll go see the stupid rock garden. So we go to this rock garden, not really knowing what it is, and it kind of looks like this. To be honest, it's a bit ugly. It's a bit kind of damp and dank in the middle of this forest. And as we started to walk through it, it just kind of kept going and going, and I can't even describe the scale of it. And a lot of it, again, is still, it's quite crude, it's quite weird, it's kind of ugly or beautiful, whatever you think they are, sculptures and so forth. And again, it just gets bigger and bigger. Now, the story behind this, as we found out slowly as we walked through it, there's a man named Nek Chand who basically, when Chandigarh was being built, so India was basically split in partition into Pakistan in 1947, and there's a huge territory or state called Punjab. Punjab was split in half. The traditional capital of Punjab was Lahore. Lahore ended up being in Pakistan. So the India part of Punjab had no capital. So they decided, the first Prime Minister, Nehru, and I think kind of forward thinking on his part, decided he wanted to represent a modern India and build a new capital for this state. And that's when Corbusier and other architects like his cousin, Pierre Genet, basically got involved to design the city. Nek Chand was kind of just an everyday civil servant who worked on, I think, roads or something. And if you know anything about India, you know that the bureaucracy, and if you work in the government, is crazy. So I imagine this man probably had barely any work to do, but he had a government job, which is very desired. So what they did when they built Chandigarh, this master planned city, was they tore down a number of old villages. And out of those villages came a bunch of rubble. So Nek Chand used to ride his bicycle with a little cart on the back and forth to different sites around Chandigarh where they had all these rubbish dumps and where they were demolishing villages and buildings. And he would collect material, and he'd ride it back into the middle of this forest that no one knew about, no one was looking at, and he would collect it there, and he would build things. This rock garden, a lot of it was built by him in secret, working in the night and working in the middle of this forest when no one knew about it. Now, Nek Chand grew up when partition was happening. Partition was a very traumatic thing for many people in India because if you lived on the Pakistan side of India and you were Hindu, you basically had to move. And you had to give up your whole life and everything. And I have a bit of a theory that a lot of what he was doing has to do with his childhood, has to do with the trauma he went through for that. And actually, when partition happened and people moved back and forth between the borders, over 6 million people were killed. if you look around this rock garden, one of the most amazing things about it is it's all found objects. So as I mentioned, Nek Chan would basically go around to these places and just grab things. So this was a wall, and upon first looking at it, it looks like sort of a rocky, gravelly wall. And as you get closer, it's all electrical parts and bits of light bulbs. There's loads of mosaic, tile kind of work all around this rock garden. It's all made of sinks, plates, saucers, cups, everything. So not only is he kind of collecting all this stuff, he's using it, and it's probably one of the greatest forms of recycling I've seen. And what gets interesting as you walk through this rock garden is not just that he's created this world, he's actually created creatures. So as you walk through this, and it just goes on and on and on, there's all of these sculptures that he's created from this material. He's basically building his own new village, his own new city, and the scale of it is massive, right? And everything is, it's kind of like Gaudi, but with all recycled materials. And so this story of Nek Chan is incredible to me. And I love the idea of this kind of, quote unquote, lowly civil servant riding his bike back and forth. So I think I read, 4 or 5 times a day, he was basically just hauling stuff back and forth on his little bike. And something else I should mention. So it was a complete secret. He started building this thing in a forest, and no one knew about it. Then the government found out about it. And because the government wasn't involved and they didn't understand it, they got very angry and they wanted to tear it down. When people found out about it, they thought it was so incredible, they kind of petitioned to save it, and a big movement happened around it. And actually, not only did it become saved, but the government ended up putting money into it, and there was a phase 2 and a phase 3. So some of this was built after that, but a lot of it were things he created. And this, this can be considered, if you study art, this could be considered kitsch or even folk art. Which sometimes is seen as a lowly form of art. Other people think it's a higher form of art. In any case, it doesn't matter. It's just amazing that this man was creating this. So there are musicians, there's people, old, young, there's monkeys, there's animals, there's women who are made from discarded bangles, metal and plastic bangles and bracelets. And so I think this story really, really inspired me, and the idea of this man really inspired me, and it did again make me think of this idea of how we're quick to label. And if I would have known about this, I would have happily skipped this rock garden, which I thought was going to be a little garden with rocks in it. And even as I first entered the rock garden, I kind of thought, this is just sort of ugly kind of thing. Why are we here? And actually, it's incredible, and what's really incredible is the man who made it. So, to kind of wrap up, I guess that I want to end with a bit of a plea. And that plea is to sort of stand up for the creative process, to investigate and to interrogate, and to not give in to easy labeling. This is another submission we had, and so is this. And, this is not ugly. It's just not, in my opinion. And the more we know why something was done, right, the more interesting it tends to become. Doesn't mean we like it more, but I do think it adds meaning, and it becomes more interesting. And then I think it's harder to just give it a knee-jerk label, right? It's very hard to say why we think something is ugly, but we often label things as ugly. And I think we should question why we do give labels to things. And I think all of the submissions we received are quite beautiful because people chose to spend their time making it, right? They could have spent their time I don't know, shopping or ranting, not that those are bad things, but they chose to make it, they chose to spend it creating something. And that's not ugly. Those faces that we saw on Google search, they're not ugly. This is ugly. This is a gay person in Iraq being thrown to his death by ISIS. This is ugly. These are photos of black men who've been arrested in the past who the North Miami Beach police use for target practice. Some of these men have been acquitted. Some of them are out there, and they heard about this, and they know that their face is being used as target practice. Right? So that is ugly. So I would just say create, 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 because question things, make things, and I think the more we create and the more we're allowed to create, right? And obviously we know about this, the more we create, the farther and farther we get from ugliness. Thanks.